All right, let's talk about the Leader's Checklist. This is a refreshingly brief book. Near the beginning of this book, Mike talks about the specific intention to keep this very brief. And I wanted to read this. He said, I've become convinced that with leadership, as with Micheal's, brevity is the soul of wit. Einstein once described the calling of modern physics as an effort to make the physical universe as simple as possible, but not simpler. The Leader's Checklist is likewise at its best when it's as bare bones as possible, but not more so. I've tried to hold that in these pages. So this is a 90-something page book, which is just insane for a business book. But this is, this was written by Michael Useem at the Wharton School of Business in Philadelphia. I have worked with Mike a bit, really, really solid, down-to-earth guy, very experienced with leadership, has a lot of stories to tell. This book is not full of them. It's more really a checklist with some backup. And in this expanded edition, which came out a few years ago, the book originally came out 10 years ago, but the expanded edition came out as an interview with the head of the Chilean government department that oversaw the rescue of those 33 miners in that accident. And also an interview with the leader of the New York Fire Department to talk about some leadership moments there as well. I'm not going to tell those stories. You could read the book on that, but it's really, really quite simple, and it's refreshingly succinct. And so what Mike talks about is there are checklists for surgeons and for pilots. And he was asked at one point, why not have a checklist for leaders? Not that it's that simple. Excuse me, I don't mean to insult my surgeon friends to suggest that surgery is simple, but not that it's as simple as following a checklist, but a checklist could be the starting point. And so I became fascinated with this idea, and he shares this. I've seen him do a presentation on this list probably 8 or 9 times. He talks about the 15 items on the list and leaves space for 16, saying, who knows what's next and what the next item will be. But this has been the list for more or less the past 10 years or so. So let's talk about what is actually on the list, what these things mean. And then for each one of these items, I want to draw upon some of the questions that are included later in the book, which he calls part of the owner's manual for each of these items. So let's get into this. And please feel free to interrupt me. We're a proud few tonight, so I don't think that it'll be too disruptive if you interrupt. So here's the list. This is the Leader's Checklist in numerical order. Articulate a vision. Think and act strategically. Identify personal implications. Convey your character. Honor the room. Communicate persuasively. Decide decisively. Motivate the workforce. Embrace the front line. Take charge and lead change. Manage relations and emotions. Strengthen leadership in self and others. Dampen over-optimism and pessimism. Build a diverse top team. And place common interest first. So my reaction when I first looked at this was pretty basic. And he refers to the list sometimes in some situations as mind-numbingly obvious at times, but still worth noting. But of course, the obvious doesn't make it simple. So of course you need to articulate a vision. You probably need to start with that. It doesn't make it easy. And that's part of what this whole conversation's about. So let's go through each one. So articulate a vision.
Andrew, it's Kathy. Do you want me to hold my questions till the end?
No, go ahead. What do you got?
Can you go back to so 2 questions here. So is this the priority or is this just 15? I mean, did he speak to that or?
I've heard him say that articulate a vision is the most important thing.
Right.
Which correlates a bit to authoritative leadership, as Daniel Goleman calls it, as a leadership style. I mean, start with what's the North Star. But I don't think that there is, that the other 14 are ranked accordingly.
Okay. And then he left a space for 16. Is that inherent or is that obvious or, because I have one that I would put in.
What would you put in?
You know what I put in, having been a leader most of my life, courage, courage, and be brave.
Be brave. Okay. Cool.
Well, I think I've seen a lot of articles, especially during COVID, about leaders having courage to do the right thing.
Mhm.
Most people don't because they'd rather do the popular thing and be a people pleaser.
Mhm.
So, and I'm sure you coach to this all the time,
Mhm.
but you have to have courage when it's the hardest to have courage, right? And because it's lonely at the top. So I think that that's and I guess I don't want to drag this down, but I'm reminded of Simone Biles and a lot of things where people have had courage in the last 2 or 3 months to do the right thing, even though it's not maybe the popular thing.
Right.
That would be one thing I personally would add. So
Cool. And that sounds totally reasonable to me. And as we go through this, think about where that appears in this list. So as I understand these items as we go through them, I think courage is going to show up on decide decisively. It's going to show up in terms of placing common interest first, because it takes a lot of courage to place common interest first. If I'm going to lose, I personally, or my group, or my department, or my function is going to lose something as a result of this decision, take charge and lead change to put ourselves out there as responsible for a significant change is also courageous, and maybe others too. So I appreciate your casting the courage umbrella over this as we go through it. Cool.
thank you.
So articulate a vision means formulate a clear and persuasive vision and communicate it to all members of the enterprise. Okay, seems pretty straightforward. So the questions to consider with regard to how well we're doing this are, do my direct reports see the forest, not just the trees? Was that an idea that just do my direct reports see the forest, not just the trees? Right. So do they see the whole vision, not just the next task? Does everyone in the room know not only where we're going, but why? Great question, I think. And is the destination compelling and appealing? So what we're suggesting here is that, yeah, it's not just a vision, it's a vision that matters and that people can get behind. So I'd suggest sort of moving forward with these because we have another 14 to get to, and then we can always circle back. Think and act strategically. Set forth a pragmatic strategy for achieving that vision, so referring back to the vision, both short and long term. Ensure that it's widely understood. Consider all the players and anticipate reactions and resistance before they are manifest. So there's a lot there, right? So if we're going to think and act strategically, we need to make the strategy. We need to be sure people understand it, and we need to anticipate reactions to it. Again, this is a lot packed in there. So the questions to ask: do we have a realistic plan, both for creating short-term results and mapping out the future? Have we considered all the players and anticipated every roadblock? This is one of these trick questions, I think, is if you say yes, you probably haven't. I'd be very concerned if I was, I've anticipated everything. And has everybody embraced, and can everybody explain the firm's competitive strategy and value drivers? So this is really, it's like think and act strategically, but be sure everybody gets it. That connects to the communicate piece that's later, but the communication's got a little bit of a different focus. But this, if number one is vision, number two is strategy. Communicate it, be sure everybody gets it. Number three, honor the room. I love the language of that, the way he puts that. So frequently express your confidence in and support for those who work with and for you. So does everyone in the room know that you respect and value their talents and efforts? Have you made it clear that their upward guidance is always sought? Is it safe to give input? A little bit of psychological safety here coming in. Is there a sense of entitlement on the front lines, and do they see themselves as us, not them? As us, not them. So essentially, what's the morale like on the front lines? All part of honoring the room. Is there that sense of honoring and we're in this together? Is number three. Number four, let's see if courage shows up here, Kathy. Take charge. Embrace a bias for action and of taking responsibility, even if it's not formally delegated, particularly if you're well positioned to make a difference. So this is called step into the leadership moment, step into taking responsibility, even if it may not be my job, particularly if I'm well positioned to do it. And because what this is saying, to me anyway, is that leadership shows up in all kinds of places, the places where it's needed. So are you prepared to take charge even when you're not in charge? If so, do you come with a capacity and position to embrace responsibility? Right? So do you come with a mindset to do that? For the technical issues ahead, are you ready to delegate but not abdicate? Right? So taking charge doesn't mean I have to do everything and I'll make all the technical decisions. I can delegate but not abdicate. Can I stay connected to that? So take charge is number 4. How does this feel so far? Feel like, okay, fairly logical? We just want to find the person who walks on water who can do all these things really, really well.
I think it's great. I think there's each of these you could talk about for a half hour.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
A few days, I was thinking. You know.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. And at the same time, it's like, this is really practical, useful. It's like, this is a checklist.
Yeah.
And if you were to think about, he has never made a 360 out of this or anything. It's been researched in terms of effectiveness, anecdotally, and it's been vetted with many leaders, but it's not as though there's a 360 or let's measure how well people are doing each one of these things, et cetera. But certainly in terms of the leadership development and executive coaching work that we do, I think there's a lot of places this can support what we do and provide some sort of lattice for what we do. All right, let me keep moving. So act decisively.
One thing I would, and this may come with number 5 or the one, I love this, but I think also one of the common ground rules I always had is when you're getting everyone on the board, on the train, so to speak, and getting them on the bus, it doesn't mean that just because you're on the bus, you won't get thrown off the bus. It means you have to be included, but you also have to agree to disagree. So there's a time when you've got to move on. We're not going to debate it forever. So, and there should be room for discussion. There should be room for thought, and everybody needs to understand your point earlier, where we're going and why we're going there. But at some point, Jack Welch used to do this all the time. You guys got to you're either with me or you're not. So, it's the coach change, Andrew. So just a point that I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. Act decisively, make good and timely decisions, and ensure that they are executed. So here we are, Kathy. I think we're closer to that here. Are most of your decisions both good and timely? Do you convey your strategic intent and then let others reach their own decisions? So this is a little bit of that vision piece, I think. Are we setting the destination and letting others reach their own decisions towards that? And is your decision threshold close to a 70% go point? So this is called, we don't need full agreement, right? It's unrealistic. It slows us down. We don't need that. So part of acting decisively is that it does not need to be unanimous decisions. Number 6, communicate persuasively. Communicate in ways that people will not forget. Simplicity and clarity of expression help. So are the messages about vision, strategy, and character crystal clear and indelible? Have you mobilized all communication channels from purely personal to social media? And can you deliver a compelling speech before the elevator passes the 10th floor? Communicate persuasively. This I think is one of the more straightforward ones. I think we've all heard this a bit, and it's good that it's on the list because obviously it's real important. Motivate the troops. Appreciate the distinctive intentions that people bring. And then build on those diverse motives to draw the best from each. So have you identified each person's hot button and focused on it? So what's their motivation? What fuels them? Do you work personal pride and shared purpose into most communications? So this relates a little bit to communicate persuasively. I think it's why that's here next to it on the list. Do you work pride and purpose into most communications? And are you keeping some ammunition dry for those urgent moments when you need it? So this is also about, when we might come in with a motivating kick of some kind. Are we ready for that? I think that's an interesting question related to motivating the troops. Number 8, embrace the front lines. Delegate authority except for strategic decisions and stay close to those most directly engaged with the work of the enterprise. So this is delegate, but stay close. So have you made your intent clear and empowered those around you to act? Do you regularly meet with those in direct contact with customers? I like this one. This is a specific, actionable, more granular. Do you regularly meet with those in direct contact with customers? I'm sure that there's a lot of people that we might ask this question to that go, no. So obviously by inference, that means there's a value in doing that. If we're not doing that, we're not embracing the front lines. Is everybody able to communicate their ideas and concerns to you? So this is the transparency, and can people speak up? So that's embracing the front lines, keeping those lines of communication open. Okay, I know you'll interrupt me if you have questions. Build leadership in others. Are all managers expected to build leadership among their subordinates? Is that part of what an assumed part of leadership? Is that we're all developing leaders all the time? Does the company? Go ahead, Kathy.
I love this one.
Yeah.
Because I think, it used to be your job as a leader was to manage the troops, right? But now our job as a leader is to build leadership below, right? So I love this one.
Yeah. Well, I'm coaching a number of people now who at least 2 or 3 that I can recall right at the moment, who say, yeah, I'm talking to my boss about getting promoted, and she's saying to me, yeah, well, do you have a successor? Because if you don't have a successor, we're not going to promote you. It pushes the attention back to here. So does the company culture foster the effective exercise of leadership? That's a juicy question to me. Does the company culture foster the effective exercise of leadership? So do I lead in such a way that others can lead? I really like that question. And are leadership development opportunities available to most, if not all, managers? Or is leadership development reserved for a select few? Because if it is, we're not building leadership in others particularly well. That's number 9. Number 10, manage relations. Again, interesting choice of words. Build enduring personal ties with those who look to you and work to harness the feelings and passions of the workplace. Enduring personal ties with those who look to you, not necessarily who report to you, and work to harness the feelings and passions of the workplace. Is the hierarchy reduced to a minimum, and does bad news travel up? Are managers self-aware and empathetic? And are autocratic, egocentric, and irritable behaviors censured? So, in other words, do we tolerate what we shouldn't be tolerating? Because if we do, we're not managing our relationships very well, because people won't come to us with bad news, for example. So I think we've got another series of really good practical questions. Number 11. I know you can't even remember what's on the list. It was so long ago with the 15. Well, we'll come back. Identify personal implications. Help everybody appreciate the impact that division and strategy are likely to have on their own work and future within the firm. There's a typo in there, forgive me. How about that? Have everybody appreciate the impact that the vision and strategy are likely to have on their own work and future with the firm. So it's not enough to share the vision and the strategy, but to help people understand how it will impact them. And I would imagine that that's quite a thing to double click, because it could be, oh, it's great, it's going to impact you, we're all going to win. It may be, no, if we succeed with the strategy, your division is going to lose some of its people if we invest, for example, in this IT thing, or if we outsource something. But that's part of the job, to help people identify personal implications. Questions that support this. Do employees appreciate how the firm's vision and strategy impact them individually? What this is suggesting is that if people don't appreciate how it affects me, that's the leader's responsibility. That's interesting. I think the place is quite a responsibility there. What private sacrifices will be necessary for achieving the common cause? How will the plan affect people's personal livelihood and quality of work life? As a leader, I need to know that. Number 12, convey your character. See, it's interesting. I think this relates to the previous one. That could explain some of the sequence. Convey your character through gesture, commentary, and accounts. Ensure that others appreciate that you are a person of integrity. Some other really practical questions in this group too. Have you communicated your commitment to performance with integrity? So have you said what you need to say about it? Do others in the organization know you as a person, and do they know your aspirations and your hopes? There's a level of transparency that's important here. And I love this question. Have you been in the same room with everybody who works with you within the past year? Now, maybe, he didn't write this during a pandemic, maybe be a little bit different, the type of pandemic, but have you been in the same room with everybody who works with you within the past year? I think that's a great leadership principle.
I have to say for me, just, in my employment history, this is the one that always is the one that shows me what the organization is like the most. And when I do have a sense of my managers or my leaders' character, when I see them regularly, it's a much different experience from the top down. I feel that this one just lights up for me a little bit.
Yep, cool. Well, it's certainly a great marker. If I were thinking, okay, if I want to go work, if I'm thinking about working somewhere, how do I get the answers to these questions? Because that's going to mean a lot to me. Number 13, dampen over optimism and pessimism. And it also said, counter the hubris of success. Focus attention on latent threats and unresolved problems, and protect against the tendency for managers to engage in unwarranted risk. There's a lot in here, right? So counter the hubris of success, focus on latent threats and unresolved problems. So be aware of what's lurking, and protect against the tendency to engage in unwarranted risk. There's a lot in there. So it's sort of like manage the ups and the downs. Be ready. Have you prepared the organization for unlikely but extremely consequential events? Do you celebrate success but also guard against the byproduct of excess confidence? And have you paved the way not only for quarterly results, but for long-term performance? That's the short and long term.
This is great. I'm learning so much, just when you think you can't learn anymore. But anyway, I'm gonna take this call and then I'll come back and put on.
Okay. Yeah, and it's interesting, Zach, because when I raised this book, people are like, "What is this book? Nobody's ever heard of this book. It's not a sexy book. It's not a best time." Say, yeah, but it's a damn practical little book. I like it for that. So I kind of wanted to be sure it was on our list. So dampen over optimism and pessimism. This is about paying attention to human nature, the hubris of success, and the potential for unwarranted risk, and pay attention to what's lurking below the surface a little bit. Yeah. Number 14, build a diverse top team. Leaders need to take final responsibility, but leadership is also a team sport, best played with an able roster of those collectively capable of resolving all the key challenges. So the team should have an able roster, collectively capable of resolving all the challenges. Have you drawn quality performers into your inner circle? Are they diverse in expertise but united in purpose? And are they as engaged and energized as you? I think that's a good question. I think that's potentially a really challenging question, because if it's not, you really have some opening up to do. Are they as engaged and energized as you? And finally, 15, place common interest first. In setting strategy, communicating vision, and reaching decisions, common purpose comes first, personal self-interest last. So in all decisions, have you placed shared purpose ahead of private gain? I'll give you an example in a second. Do the firm's vision and strategy embody the organization's mission? So this is suggesting that if the strategy is not consistent with the mission, so in other words, if we're really not strategically operating in a way that's aligned with our mission, chances are we're not placing common interests first. We've evolved to a place where there's some more personal interest showing up. Are you thinking like a president or chief executive, even if you are not one? And the inference here is, or am I thinking like somebody who's just leading my team or my function or my, as opposed to our? So in the book, the most, to me, resonant example of this was the general who presided over the surrender of the Confederate troops at Appomattox was not Ulysses Grant, but Ulysses Grant nominated another general to do this. I'm not exactly sure why. And as the Confederate troops were coming forward to basically lay down their arms and surrender, the order went out from the Union general to take a certain position with weapons that was a sign of respect for the adversary. They were not aiming at them as they came up. They were not whatever. They were in a position, they were at sort of a present arms position, I think it was called, that was a sign of respect, which was apparently recognized by General Lee and some of the other leaders of the Confederate Army. It's like they would have all the reason in the world. In fact, the general who issued this order had been wounded several times in that war and died from one of those wounds after. He would have had all the reason in the world to be like, come on, you blankety blanks, we got you now. And no, that would not have supported reconciliation at all. That was one example. And the other one was a New York firefighter who received a commendation for essentially, even though I think it was a man, he basically crawled in. I'm sorry, I apologize. It was an Iraqi military leader in the U.S. military who crawled through all kinds of active fire situations in order to pull somebody out of a very dangerous situation. That's placing common interest first, even if we're at the very top. We're placing ourselves at risk. That's the common interest. That's what we all do, as opposed to just protecting my own hide. So place common interest first. I think that's also a very interesting last one. I think that's true with that one. So that's the 15. So one other note here that Mike talked about. So to activate the leader's checklist on a regular basis, here's what you do. Study leadership moments. Solicit coaching and mentoring. Accept stretch experiences. Conduct after-action reviews of personal leadership moments. So there's this review thing going on here. It's very conscious, very reflective. Endure extremely stressful leadership moments. In other words, hang in there. I've heard him speak about this. Hang in there, because it's the best teacher. And experience the leadership moments of others. So that suggests to me that this last point means as someone else on my team or someone else in my organization or my boss or my boss's boss is doing these things, these first 5 points, how can I learn from it or experience from it? What is that quotation about? The smart person learns from their experience and the wise person learns from the experience of others. I think it's a bit like that. So that's how to activate the checklist. Okay, so any questions, or should we go back to the whole list so you can see the whole aggregate again?
I'd be curious if he talks about how he organizes it in the practical, in the practice sense of it. Does he have the checklist out and every week he sees what's going on, or it's just a thing that he keeps in his mind?
Yeah, well, I mean, the author here is a professor. He's not a CEO, but he holds this up. I've seen him use it as a filter that can come back to. So, for example, if you might tee off a leadership program by talking about this, then over the course of the conversation in subsequent hours or days, you'll circle back to some of these pieces in response to stories that people are sharing, particularly if people are sharing stories where leaders or organizations have struggled. So it's more like, let's bring back principle number 7, because that can be illustrative here as to what would be more helpful. Yeah, but it's not like a hiring criteria. It's not like that. Although, wouldn't it be interesting to interview someone or in fact, whether we're coming in a leadership position or whether I'm being interviewed by a leader in an organization, and I might ask questions about this myself, like some of the ones you spoke about that essentially convey culture, that convey your character pieces, that lead to culture. No, it's a good question.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing to just keep going back to, because everything is always changing, and your answers to any of one of those questions on how you're doing one of those things can differ from year to year, from week to week, from department to department. I feel like, if your guiding statement is your mission statement that you keep looking back to, how these support it may be changing depending on who you're working with, who's coming in, how you're doing personally. And I feel like it's an ever changing thing that you can be checking in with all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, as a leader, you're always taking feedback, right? This is feedback. You're always learning. You're always growing. I especially like number 13 because being an optimist at heart, sometimes I tend to be over optimistic, but I do agree that I think when you're addressing the group or when you're trying to, how can I say this? When you have to be careful that you're not all sunshine and roses, because everybody takes that to the bank and then they come back and use it. I don't want to say against you, but use it to come back and say, well, you said this.
Yeah.
So you really be a balance. You have to balance, because people always want to hear good news, but you don't want to be so overly optimistic that you disappoint them either, right? Because they're going to say, well, you said this, and so
yeah.
And that,
so motivating without over optimism. Yeah.
over delivering. I mean, under promising, right? What do they always tell us, right? Don't over promise and under deliver. It's better to over deliver and
And you know what I wonder too is, and this isn't about you, but it's about the point you raised, Kathy, that how does this also connect with courage? Because I think sometimes to be courageous is to set some audacious, optimistic goal. And so I want to be careful that the boldness, the healthy level of boldness that one might have doesn't lead to an over-promising or a destination that's just not realistic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right.
And some of that also relates, we're talking about leadership styles and emotional intelligence and this notion of being a pace-setting leader. Like, it's great to be a pace-setting leader, but if you're such a pace-setter, you're so far ahead and they can't keep up with you, then you're either overly optimistic or potentially you just lost them.
That's an interesting observation because as a leader, and we've seen this a lot in founders and entrepreneurs, right? Because they're like already down the road and everybody's waiting still at the station. So it's important that your vision, your message, your communication, that they all get it. Because sometimes in your head, what's going on. But as a leader, if they're not getting it, it's not up to you to do it. They have to be able to implement, right? So I've seen this a lot, and you really have to have patience. And like I'll say, I can get through the door, right? But as a leader, you got to get the whole team through the door, right? So your success is really valued on how well you can get the team through the door, not how well you get through the door, right? So
right, that's right. Well, if I've shared something, let's put it this way: if I have communicated something and it's not understood or appreciated, then I haven't communicated anything. I just hit send.
Well, I think it happens a lot because people understand. You see this a lot in technology firms, and you see some of these CEOs stepping down or stepping aside because they were able to get the firm to a certain point, but they can't get it to the next point, right? Mm-hmm. So, and that's pretty normal for business, right? Yeah. I mean, they were able to get it, the idea, born and created, but they can't keep it going, right? So
let's just put a slight pin in what you're saying, Kathy. And let me just say that I'm glad to have had this conversation with you and just I don't say just, to express this simple and yet multi-layered list with some really juicy, useful questions that I think is a really helpful tool in our coaching. It's a helpful tool both to invite the leaders we're coaching to do these things, but also the leaders we're coaching and supporting in training and coaching, however we do that, to even be asking these questions of their leaders to enhance their leadership. So there's a lot to this, even though it's very simple and a very thin book, which is so encouraging for those of us that just have so much to read. So I appreciate the good conversation. I think there's a lot here and look forward to continuing the conversation.